Hi, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Banking on the Cloud, the IBM Cloud for Financial Services and Community sponsored initiative. So today, delighted to be joined by two financial services industry titans. We've got Monica Sasso from Red Hat and PJ. PJ, I always get your name wrong. This is PJ. PJ's awesome. From JWG, and we're going to be talking about DORA. So the enforcement date of 17th of January has come and gone. The world is still turning. We're all still here. There's still lots of work to be done, though. And I'd love just to kick it over to our guests for them to introduce themselves and their full names and explain to us how they know so much about DORA and why they care. So, Monica, can I start with you?
Sure. Hello. Always happy to have a chat with you too. I think some point we should all I feel like we should have like a joint bank account or a joint diary or something. We have these conversations so often. My name is Monica Sasso. I'm on Red Hat's global financial services team. I'm based in London. I care about this for lots of reasons. One, because I'm a nerd like this and I love all of anything to do with regulation and technology and financial services. I think it's incredibly important, not only for us that work in the tech companies, but for us as in the wider us in the ecosystem and the economy and the financial markets. We're interested in it because we're a tech provider, right? and what makes Red Hat unique is open source. And a lot of the principles and the cut and thrust of what DORA is trying to achieve is actually in line with our open source principles and how we operate and build software resiliently. So that is why I care about it.
Awesome. PJ.
Thanks, guys. I don't know about the bank account, but I do definitely share your passion for this topic. PJ Giammarino, former CEO. Let me try that again. Sorry, former CEO. Hi, I'm PJ Giammarino, former COO for technology at Barcap, which explains a bit the provenance and interest in this DORA topic. I run JWG, which is a collective that works cross trade associations to find problems that we can solve better, faster, cheaper, and safer with collaboration. And for 5 years, we've been looking at this whole digital integrity space, if I can call it that more broadly. We think there are a lot of opportunities for standards and a lot of reasons why, with 60,000 different entities trying to figure out what good DORA looks like, that we can leverage the power of collaboration to solve many of these problems, and that's why I'm here.
Which is great. And I think, you've both touched on points that are dear to the heart of the IBM Cloud for Financial Services community and council, which is mutualizing knowledge, it's collaboration, it's doing smart things together with smart people so that we're not all trying to solve the same problems alone in our lanes. And one of the things that has come up again and again in our discussions and also, the conversations that we have with our council members and with the wider community is this idea that DORA very much a marathon, not a sprint. Now, I know people are probably tired and fatigued having had that initial sprint towards the 17th of January date. Everybody deserving a bit of a breather, but it's going to be, picking up tools again and trying to figure out what the best next steps are. So with that mindset, and it's very much the resilience mindset, is what's the best we can do with what we've got where we are. What are you seeing as the best next steps moving forward and taking that long-term mindset?
I'll kick off. Yes. I think I said this before with the three of us of talking, whether it was recorded or not, I don't remember. But I think it's to firstly say it's not a tick box activity. There is not a checklist that you check off and then you're DORA compliant. So I do actually think the first thing is an understanding of why we have these laws, why they're here, and why they're important. And I know that sounds really basic and naughty and maybe even like a cop out of an answer, but I do think that really does help. And having led, big global regulation programs in banks in the city for years, that for me was always the most important thing. The most important thing here is, why are you doing this, right? And when you have that understanding, it's a heck of a lot easier to go away and do the hard stuff. And this is hard, right? A lot of this stuff is hard. It's not that it's new, but it's hard to do it as big as it's being done now. Part of that is because technology is so pervasive and it's grown faster than we figured out how to use it properly or safely. And the baddies have just as good as stuff that we do, but they don't have the processes and controls in place that we do, so they can kind of do bad stuff faster than we can do stuff to prevent them from doing bad stuff. So you have this speed versus quality tension, and I think we're kind of at this point now where they're so pervasive, we actually have to get control of it, or it's going to be a runaway train. But I also think, I guess, pulling on that same thread, it's a mindset of this is not compliance. This is a new way of operating. This is a new way of working. This is a new way of being. And I remember having done some of these programs in the past, and I said, we have to stop thinking about this as a tick box activity. Like, you're going to love this, PJ, for MiFID II, right? This is just a new operating model. Here's our operating envelope. Stop ticking boxes and just create different boundaries. And I think,
I think that,
like GDPR, same thing.
Yeah, I think your reference point is correct, but people may not understand the difference between a MiFID II and a GDPR. And for me, that gets down to the nub of this problem, right? Which is you got to understand how long and bumpy this course is. And those of us that started with the MiFID 1 in 2005 and then wound up with getting to MiFID 2 by 2018 kind of get that. There's lots of twists and turns. It's complicated. It's sicker. There's not one answer. You'll figure it out as you go, right?
And you just described 13 years, PJ.
Yeah.
Right. And that's 13 years of legislation. That's not 13 years of fines or doing work. So you've got to think that's a 20-year journey. That's people's careers.
And when we say marathon, I think people think defined time you can run in 3 hours. Yeah. And this fundamentally isn't like that. I mean, we as you mentioned the IT spend. Gartner's currently forecasting 8.7% growth a year. If any of our economies could be growing that fast, it would be fantastic. We wouldn't have all these budget issues, right? But when you're talking about going to $1 trillion a year in IT spend, by 2028, when they're going to get most serious about these inspections, you really can't think of it in the one-off GDPR or cyber or I checked some boxes and I was done. You really need to think about embedding this in the way your board starts thinking about their risks and the way that cascades down throughout the organization in a whole variety of ways.
So I think I totally concur with all of that. That idea of the metaphor probably isn't a great one, right? There isn't a finish line. So I'm gonna rethink the calling DORA a marathon, because it is misleading. Like this is never done. It's like an infinite game. And a lot of the publications, the speeches coming from, for example, the ECB, they're really clear about what they're concerned about. And I've been trying to encourage people to pay attention to those speeches. They're not just another thing. There's a lot of quite meaty depth in terms of communicating what supervisory expectations are. And your point, Monica, about people being clear about why they're doing this. Have you ever seen that cartoon of blind men touching an elephant? Have you ever seen that one? Right? Depending on what part of the elephant you touch, you think the problem statement is such and such a thing. And I think the firms that are probably going to be better placed with this are the ones who see the elephant. They don't just see the patch that they're touching.
Exactly. And I think that one of the key points there that does work with the marathon analogy, maybe just rescuing your theme here, is that we have referees for marathons, right? Yes. And they have this whole big picture in mind. And literally a month before DORA went live, they came out and they spelt out a whole different agenda than what anyone had expected. And then I think that's a really critical thing for people to realize. That the ECB's priorities for going around and supervising all of the banks that they're looking at until 2027 have just started focusing on everything that's digital integrity. Yeah. Right. And their timekeepers are going to come around saying operation resilience, IT risk, and data. And that's all together. And we never had this before. Right. And it really is a wake up call to most boards to see the regulator showing up and not just talking about credit risk, not just talking about some interest rate issues, but actually number one on their agenda item is how are you keeping the system safe? How are you managing the integrity of IT and data itself?
But that's interesting, right? Because, sorry.
No, go.
Now, if the system goes down or if there's a disruption, your credit risk is thrown out the window. So you have this interconnectivity that nobody has even envisaged, because you've seen these things in silos. And now, and I say this, I've said this a few times, but and well, maybe not today to you guys, but in other places, technology has glued us all together. What we haven't done is change how we define some of these risks. Market risk. How on earth do we not have IT resilience as a crucial element of defining market risk?
Well, we will, because we'll have the transparency around the way they've assessed their resilience, right? So there's a business consequence here because a capital buffer goes up and the market knows about it, right? So I think what we now have is a very integrated feedback loop that's been bolted on to the Basel framework. And don't be fooled by, oh, the US isn't going to do Basel, so that's dead now. This is very much alive and kicking, and I can very much see the US taking a similar approach given how significant some of these risks are.
Absolutely. And I mean, what I'd like to touch on is those supervisory expectations. So PJ, if you can call maybe some of them out, but in the context of, if you are a board member, right, what questions should you be asking? If you're somebody who is a practitioner trying to get your C-suite and your board's attention, what should you be pointing them to? And I'm thinking, for example, now it's in APAC, right? It's actually in Singapore, but there was an outage that a significant bank experienced, and there were very serious repercussions in terms of Pillar 2 buffers being augmented, in terms of a total prohibition on more IT migrations until the situation was stabilized. Now, that's the kind of thing that totally crystallizes the thinking in a boardroom or in a C-suite meeting, because a capital buffer is a big deal. So, when we're thinking about what will meeting people where they are and what they care about, what's the way of bringing this to the board, and what's the way of getting the attention of the C-suite if you are, for example, on the implementation side and you need more support, more resources, more championing?
Well, from my point of view, it's always helping them understand the consequences of not doing anything, because that's the tendency here. We've never dealt with that. We don't have to deal with it now. We'll wait till somebody gets fined or some issue in the market. But I think the regulators have been very clever about how they bake this in. So not only does your internal audit need to look at it, but somebody, like a COO or somebody that oversees all of the people that are implementing DORA needs to be able to write a report, right? And what's said in that is very critical, because the regulators will have access to all that information as part of your ICAP assessment, and you'll need to be able to tick some certain boxes on your IT risk assessments, like for the EBA, and also, I hate to say it, all that reporting that you now have to do, it has to stay live, and they can look at it when they come in and evaluate how well you're doing. So they're going to show up already armed to the teeth with the information you already give them today. And that's where, internally then, if you don't have the right kind of answers, they're going to start asking hard questions about who made what decisions in governance. And that has a personal consequence, right? Yeah. If you're unlucky enough to be in Ireland, you have a very aggressive regulator that will take a strong stance on you not being up to snuff with your SEER responsibilities.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And even if you're not in Ireland, if you're not a European country, you still have the conduct regime, which is very much like those accountability regimes. Again, it's really nailed the responsibilities for IT infrastructure to the board. So they've really the regulators have put in place the mechanism to get information out, and they've nailed the accountabilities down to where there's nowhere left to hide. So the day you have an incident, and when we have CrowdStrike 2 on the 1st of April, and I jokingly refer to that, but it's my birthday, so I give myself a present. Ultimately, you will now have 2 different operation resilience regimes live. We one in the UK from the 31st of March, and the one that's going live now for DORA. And they're very different. They haven't. People that say that Europe is a gold standard, they haven't looked at the details of the UK reporting framework that came out at the end of December. Because ultimately, the risks in the way that the UK wants to look at this is a whole nother level of detail lower. But so ultimately, anyone sitting on a board that covers both those jurisdictions ought to be really nervous.
Monica, any thoughts on that? Like PBJ touched on like CrowdStrike, for example, right, which immediately has bells ringing in my head about supply chain.
It does, but it's interesting. I read the FCA report about that afterwards, and then I was listening to something on the Financial Times. I read in the Financial Times last week about this exact topic, and it occurred to me that on the consequence thing, I was thinking about this the other day, is the FCA said all of the firms that kind of came out of the CrowdStrike thing had one thing in common. They had really clear communication plans. They knew what to do if the proverbial hit the fan. And everybody acted kind of like hashtag keep calm and carry on, right? And that's actually the definitions of resilience. That is literally what resilience is all about. Is keep calm and carry on when there's a shock to your system. And the ones that kept calm and carried on and performed the best and had the smallest outages had good, stable, clear communication plans in place. Guess what? Nothing to do with tech, everything to do with people and process. And it's all about softy stuff. Then you look at the performance in annual results. You look at bottom line sales. Guess what? CrowdStrike through the roof. Microsoft at the floor. Because CrowdStrike came out of this having had the same assessment. Great communication plans. They knew what to happen when it went wrong. It was executed immediately. The CEO was in the press. They had their problems out there. They aired their dirty laundry, and they also aired the way to clean it, right? Microsoft didn't. Microsoft isn't selling as much. CrowdStrike is booming. So that's your consequence. That's your commercial bit, right? Everybody and the markets can accept that we all make a mistake. What we can't accept as people is if you don't admit it and fix it and say, this is how it's going to get better moving on. And I found that really interesting, that the markets and customers have responded in kind.
Yeah, absolutely. I second that. I mean, I think your point about we're all glued together by technology, and that's kind of the genesis of this, right? The interdependency and the interconnection and the new nature of risk that generates. I think as an industry, we may be under-indexing on the role of people in this.
Yes. Yeah. Sure.
Right, in terms of where people fit. And automation, yes, I mean, for sure, there's going to be a level of automation that will certainly be beneficial, but it's important to have clarity about, again, what we're trying to achieve and good processes, right? Yes. Automating bad processes is a recipe for disaster. So I think there's, from my perspective, there is huge value in putting smart automation in the right place, but also making sure that people are really clear about how they're linked together, that they have good trusted relationships. The basics. I mean, one of the things actually, one of the FCA called out was that the firms who were able to respond well to CrowdStrike, they had call trees.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds really elementary, but it's literally, who do you call and can you reach them?
If Anne's not here, call Monica. Done.
I think the interesting bit, the fascinating piece for me is the suppliers, right? Yeah. And they're going to have to play into fundamentally different cultures, because the ECB is the strict head teacher. You know, they said it didn't say we needed a call tree, so it's okay you didn't have one.
I didn't do one. Yeah.
But the PRA is more the lawyer, right? Yeah. And they're the ones in there saying, well, how did you think about whether or not you needed to talk to people? And wouldn't it make sense to have a call tree? And I think just right there, you see just two of the jurisdictions, because let's not forget we got Australia coming online in July. Mm-hmm. You know, but the suppliers have to be able to bridge that gap. And the guys in procurement and within the firms have to understand that they're bridging that gap. And ultimately, this means everybody, including all the services people helping to manage the regulatory risk equation, all need to be on the same page, and they need a single source of truth in terms of what does good look like where to whom.
Yeah,
And
totally.
And it's interesting, right? I now that I'm on this side of the fence and one of the suppliers, right? And I've said this on stage and recorded before in the past about, moving fast and breaking things. And on that same vein, laws and regulations aren't there to stop you from innovating or to stop you from doing anything that you think you might need to do to solve a problem in a new and different way.
Mm.
Laws are there for two reasons, or because of two things. Number one, somebody either did something that caused harm to somebody else, and that necessitated the reason for having a law. The other reason is they're there to actually just protect our entire economy. And when you think about it that way, rather as like a shield instead of handcuffs, it's a completely different way of responding. And because we all have spent time at banks, we're kind of okay with regulations. I don't see them as a dirty word. There was a time in my career when I thought it meant job security, right? Now I see it as a way of protecting my wealth, my future, our economy, our business, and our ecosystem. And I think that that's a shift that we have to get on as tech providers, right? It's not just a tool, and if you decide to use a hammer instead of a screwdriver, not my problem, I sold you both tools.
Yeah.
It's maybe here's like a little bit of intentionality in when I sell you a screwdriver, hey, you might want to use it on a screw instead of a nail.
Well, and which business unit and what LEI owns the screwdriver, right? So
yes, but you have to explain LEI to people that might not be as nerdy as us three about these topics.
Well, this is the thing. It all gets down to those identifiers, and IBM has 160 of them, right?
We were way off, Anne.
Yeah. So
PJ asked us to guess earlier. We got like half of that.
And I went to the Glyph database as of last night for that. Very, very precise research. But if you ask ChatGPT, it'll tell you 4. Right? So it depends exactly. This is a whole discussion about the feedback mechanisms and the information we have to manage the risk. And what we saw from the ESA dry run in December was shocking to me. Shocking. Only 1,000 people participated in that out of the 20,000 that are within scope. But they found 25,000 unique contracts for 10,000 providers. And they spent some time looking at, well, do people have identifiers or not? But I think they missed the bigger picture, which to me is that this is a ticking time bomb. That if you actually think 1,000 banks have 25,000 contracts, that makes no sense.
No, exactly. That's it's. But here's the thing, right? We're missing common sense. And I go back to your thing about I didn't need a call tree. Where's your common sense, guys? I'm not the smartest person in the room. Well, maybe in this exact room right now, I might be the smartest person in the room because I'm the only person in the room. But we have to kind of, I think, stop thinking in our silos and our area of expertise is, right? This is where we do need people that are generalists, that have that systems thinking, that can see the bigger picture, because it's not about he said, she said, or he's right or she's wrong, whatever. Here's some common sense here. How on earth could you have only 25 contracts as any company? You run a small business with 50 employees, you probably have more than 25 contracts.
Yeah.
So if you're a big corporate.
Yeah. No, I agree totally. And I one of the things that just keeps coming back again and again to me is when I hear people talking about the regulation being too hard. Now, I'm not here to lobby in favor of regulation, but I always advocate for what I consider, like you, Monica, good sense, right? And what I have noticed is that not all organizations and not all people are equally willing to do hard things, even when there is a significant upside, right? The short-term incentive may not be there for whatever reason. People don't want to. I was preparing for a security certification just before Christmas. And when I was reading the material for that, all of which is just industry domain knowledge and best practice, it struck me that if voluntarily you were applying what is established as industry best practice for security, governance, and risk management, you'd be in great shape.
Yep.
And yet, I think the reason we're ending up with regulation is because, for whatever reason, organizations choose to not voluntarily apply all of the known best practice. So that collective mindset that you're thinking about, that you're talking about, in terms of what do I need to do to manage my risk, my resilience, and my business, and how can my success also positively impact yours without hurting myself, right? That's the thing, the shift I really believe needs to happen, is that we can help ourselves, and in so doing help others without causing any prejudice to ourselves. It's not a concession, we're not losing anything. I'm just going to be really interested to see how the regulatory approach in the UK and in the EU, whether that approach of black and white law is delivering better outcomes than, say, in the US, where for now they're choosing not to legislate, but they still have the same concerns. And I'd love to segue maybe into industry collaboration then, because we have these jurisdictions, a massive amount of firms, hundreds of thousands of people mobilized on these topics. How can we help each other?
I think you hit the nail on the head earlier there, because it's where does it say I need to do it this way? That's what everybody wants to know. And actually, if you dig through DORA, you'll find a reference to, I think it was a 2013 law that got passed around standards. And it basically puts a framework for how do you think about standards. Now, the challenge is for this stuff, there aren't many trade associations you can actually go to. In fact, I could probably count them all in one hand. And ultimately, what I'm finding in my discussion with the trade associations, because this is what I do, I bring these issues to them, is they can't even find people in the firms that want to come to a meeting to talk about it, right? So I think the regulators are going to have some fairly harsh wake-up conversations in the crucible of you didn't have a call tree and therefore you didn't do as good a job on that incident, for people to realize, oh, okay, for this business context, for this particular problem we're trying to manage, this is what good looks like. And in order to do that, you have to facilitate and use the trade associations for what they're good at, which is representing the interest of specific businesses. But you need to be able to help federate the knowledge about how do you manage an incident for a buy-side, sell-side on exchange where the data provider isn't there, and what risk is that, and how do you think about evaluating what you do? And there are places you can go today for those conversations, but that we're no way, shape, or form even started as we sit here at the start of the marathon.
We haven't even bought trainers.
No, I mean, we in the Cloud Council that we run, right, the initiative that sponsors this podcast, one of the things that our members say frequently is that they really value the opportunity to get together with peers and for it to be a safe space where they can actually say what's on their mind, and where we can address very specific topics and they can learn from each other. And people will explain, here's what we're doing with SaaS right now. Here are the challenges that we're finding when we're trying to consume SaaS, or when we're trying to migrate from an on-prem environment to a cloud environment, hyperscale, IBM or other. Here are the things we're thinking through and the difficulties that they're encountering, particularly when they're operating in multiple jurisdictions. So to your point exactly, PJ, right? Are there enough forums? We're doing what we can to facilitate those conversations. But the complexity of the topic warrants for sure more and more conversation, and at a more operational level, right? Sort of, it's not theorizing about the regulation per se. It's like, it is what it is. It's there. Now what? What do we do with it? What's the best path forward? So that we don't get stuck in a kind of analysis paralysis. And when people ask me what I do, it's sort of, I help our clients and I help people in the industry try to navigate the Venn diagram of the regulation, risk appetite, business obligations, aspirational ambitions, and try, okay, now what's the ikigai of that? What can we actually do? And turn it into actions that mean something, so that we're moving the dial forward on ultimately delivering business value. It's like, nobody's going to get a medal for being excellent at DORA. It's how do you integrate DORA into your business so that you're excellent at your business?
And it's not, I take it as slightly more than that, which when people ask me why I talk about RegTech, well, back in 2012, it was like a new thing and no one else was talking about it. I said, well, the business has to have other things in it to be able to be compliant.
Yes.
And it's just, you can't come in afterwards with a control. You need to think about those controls, as you execute the if then else statements. And ultimately, I think that's what this conversation forces us to, for the technical standards, because we need to be able to bake RegTech in. And in order to do that, you need a single source of truth that says, here's what we think our reg is. And guess what? Most places don't have that. And this is a fundamental shift from looking at things after the fact, or to having control statements and auditors and those kind of things, to people when they're doing the jobs being able to record the information and having a feedback loop about whether that information is good enough.
Yeah.
But this is then that automating compliance thing, right? This is having pull through and transparency and proper dashboards, not just Excel sheets with a macro on top.
Exactly. Those are ticking time bombs.
But one of the, when I was preparing for today, one of the things I was thinking about is a lot of these problems are shared, right? We all know the proverb that our grandmothers and mothers would have told us: a problem shared is a problem halved, and all that kind of stuff. And whether or not the regulators are okay with there being more standards and groups, what, we're not going to talk about that right now. But these sorts of problems, right? Fixing them doesn't not give you a competitive advantage, right? So if I know how my competitor is doing cybersecurity, why wouldn't I want to share with them how we look at doing it? Because at the end of the day, if I'm Bank A in the UK and my biggest competition is Bank B, and Bank B gets an attack, guess what? It's not just that I might win business share. There was a time when you would automatically go straight to, I'm going to win business share. You should be terrified, because now the markets are moving. You're going to have to look at your own balance sheet. And guess what? You're next on the targets list. So surely it would behoove us to do some of this stuff together, because actually I get no competitive advantage by creating my own bespoke report.
Yeah.
But the counter argument there, though, is for anti-money laundering, because we remember the KYC utilities.
Yeah. I mean, I get that, but which problem are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve for digital integrity. We're trying to solve for keeping the market stable.
But the interest that people, the reason the answer to your grandmother's question comes down to, people think they can get something out of being part of the solution, and so they can make it a utility and they can own a piece of it. Yeah. And that's what we have to really crack here, because at the minute no one's even like talking about that.
No one's even talking about it.
They will do.
Yeah, they will do, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, PJ, you and I've had these conversations ad infinitum, about trade and transaction reporting, right? It's the same thing.
Yeah, and that's a great example.
It's not the same thing. But
because there was a domain model where the industry had something digital to tie to, you could graft on, here's how we do the report. And now you can download that out of Finos, and you can deploy it, and everyone's happy, right? That's what I'm trying to figure out. How do we do that in this space? And I think ultimately it comes down to important efforts like what you guys are doing here at IBM, and getting your customers together to help them understand that there are these standards, there are these tools, there is this open source. We don't have to do this with a bunch of papers sitting on someone's website. We can actually have code that helps us make sure our technology is up to snuff for the operational resilience regimes all over the world.
And this is where, there's a lot of advantages with open source. Not only is it mutualizing costs, it's mutualizing knowledge. And even though it's open, it doesn't mean it's bad. It means that everybody looks at it, right? So if you have everybody looking at a problem, you're going to see if it's wrong way sooner than if you keep it behind your vault.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I see a lot of parallels between the keys to success for digital transformation projects that succeed. There was a study that McKinsey put out, and one of the things that they call out, which is counterintuitive, but I totally buy into it, is that digital transformation projects fail due to a lack of ambition.
Yep.
Not because people aim too low, and that's why things don't deliver. And I'm almost feeling that there could be that risk on operational resilience, whereas it feels hard, we're going to de-scope, we're going to scale it back. Whereas if there was a real vision of the digital integrity and what this will achieve for the micro level of the firm and more at a more macro level, we have a better chance of doing something significant and substantial. Leveraging standards, leveraging the collaborative infrastructure that's already there, but aiming for something that is not just aspirational and wishy-washy. It's aspirational and it really makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, it's this vision and mission stuff, isn't it? It's the flowery stuff.
Yes. With that, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to call it a day here.
Sorry, we talk a lot, don't we?
No, it's fantastic. We're going to point to some resources in the links in terms of different artifacts that could be helpful for people looking at these topics. I just want to say a huge thank you to PJ and to Monica for joining us today. It was a delight as always. This is going to be a topic I'm sure we're going to be revisiting during the year. We'd love you to weigh in the comments section. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much for hosting as well. I think it's always to the hoster to get a compliment. You've done a great job pulling this all together and promoting this whole topic. One last thing for me, we're not done. This goes on to AI and cyber and all the other rules that are coming on. If you need help with those assessments, please get in touch, because this is the point at which people need to know for those 50,000 paragraphs for the UK and EU, where am I? And there's so much that RegTech and Gen AI can do to help that we're really excited about and happy to talk to anybody about how to apply it.
Likewise.
Find LEIs.
All 160 IBM LEIs, get in touch.